Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this Analyst Insight podcast from the Information Security Forum. If you are a regular listener, then hello again. Always good to see and welcome you back. Did you get your haircut? Is that a new bag? Anyhow, settle in. This is going to be a good one, I'm sure of that. And if this is your first time here, then you are very welcome. I'm sure you will fit right in and feel at home. To both the regulars and the newbies, if there is something you feel the need to share, by all means get in touch. Mark.ward at securityforum.org is the address for any comments, ideas, or requests to join in. This episode is about managing vulnerabilities. We're going to be exploring the ideas, the good practice found in the recently released briefing paper written by Lee Munson. He's here. I'll introduce him in a moment. We'll be looking at the nature of that problem, what organizations can do about it, who use these vulnerabilities to attack organizations, and what can be done about that. Are organizations hostages to fortune and fate, or can they forge their own destiny, at least when it comes to their digital defenses? Here to help explore that topic are surely two of the most dangerous people on earth, I would imagine, because they know all about all the vulnerabilities and how they can be exploited. Just be thankful they are on the side of the good guys. First up is Raj Samani, now Chief Scientist at Rapid7, formerly the same at McAfee, Chief Innovation Officer at the CSA, and a member of Europol's advisory group on internet security and lots of other things. Hello, Raj. Great to have you here. Cybercrime never sleeps, and nor do you. You're a busy man, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm really glad we're not on video because my hair's going grayer and grayer by the day, I think.
Is that because it's terrible out there, or just you're burning it off from the inside, maybe? I'm not sure.
Well, I don't think I've got time to cut my hair. I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm actually planned tomorrow, so I'll be younger tomorrow, I promise.
Also, here is Lee Munson, one of the ISF Senior Research Analysts and author of that paper on vulnerability management. Hello, Lee.
Hi, Mark. I'm also glad we're not on video.
Yeah, these podcasts are supposed to humanize the ISF, but you don't want to see us humans, really, you don't. But anyway, you and Raj used to work together at McAfee, so is this like getting the band back together? Are you Simon and Garfunkel, or are you Liam and Noel?
I think it depends on how the football results are going. We're pleased to know that Raj and I got all of that out of the way before the podcast began, that there's some intense rivalry there.
Right. Life, cybersec, and in football, three pillars of a sort of fulfilled life, I would imagine.
It worked for us in a previous life, didn't it, Raj?
Excellent. So just to get things started on the vulnerability management side, Lee, if you can get us started about sort of why this has become a big issue and what sort of kicked off the need to do this research. I mean, I don't know if there were particular members that were worried about some things, or just what you saw out there that prompted the paper.
Yeah, so a large number of members reached out to us and said they're struggling with vulnerability management. So I decided to write a paper. And as I went into it, I thought this was all going to be about how do you prioritize vulnerabilities? Because the days of patching everything all of the time are well gone now. What I then found out was it's a whole lot bigger than that. And organizations are challenged in many different ways, from asset discovery through to communicating to other departments within the business and business stakeholders as well.
Yeah, because I think on the first page of the paper, there's that stat about most organizations have something like 100,000 vulnerabilities. So that's a pretty big to-do list.
And actually, Mark, that's a very small number for some organizations. Some run into the millions.
Right. Yeah, Raj, I don't know, is this the kind of thing that, given your past in handling these types of threats, is it vulnerabilities were the way in, or is it sort of, they've just become that main currency for those cybercrime groups?
Well, I mean, they are one of the main ways. I mean, if you think about, for example, Klopp's exploitation of the Move IT vulnerability, that's clearly an example. We've had a ton of other ransomware groups exploiting specific unpatched systems, but there is also the back door left open. There are the RDP systems with passwords of 123 and password and administrator, ridiculously still the most common passwords. There are, phishing attacks. They're it's all of the above, really. But just to touch on the vulnerability space, the world has become a dumpster fire because we remember when, in the past, one of those critical vulnerabilities, RCE, which was being exploited in the wild, like Heartbleeds and Log4js, maybe one a year, maybe one a quarter. And internally, we have this process called ETR. So I run the Metasploit team here at Rapid7. And we had 8 of them in the last 3 weeks. In fact, we published 2 this week as well. So the rate of exploitation of critical vulnerabilities for malicious purposes is, I don't want to say it's a daily event, but it won't be long before it's a daily event.
So what's driving that? Are the bad guys just too creative, innovative, and busy, or I'm curious about, or is there just so much software out there that chances are there's vulnerabilities in it that are going to be critical and people are finding?
Well, yes, I think, but also we have to acknowledge the fact that we've become a lot better at identifying the exploitation of critical vulnerabilities. So our ability to be able to identify O days in use is a lot quicker. So like I referenced the Move IT vulnerability, but we started to see exploitation of that kind of 3 days before the public announcement. So the ability for industry to be able to identify and detect the exploitation of these vulnerabilities has improved. And I think that's a positive sign to it. And of course, we are dealing with criminal gangs that have enormous budgets and the ability to be able to research. I mean, look, that Move IT vulnerability was not trivial. It's not like a buffer overflow or something where you could easily identify it. It was a non-trivial attack, and for a group like that to be able to exploit it says to me that it is a level of capability that is better than I'd initially anticipated.
Yeah. So just I wanted to get clear on something. So in some cases, the bad guys find these things first and you react, but in other cases, you find them first? So is there a sort of, I guess, that old-fashioned phrase of it's an arms race, but yeah, is there the capabilities on both sides?
Well, yeah, so I think what I was referring to is if the criminals find it and begin to exploit it, then we as the industry detect their use of exploiting that particular vulnerability. And I think that's us reacting. Then there is the proactive side of it. So we do our own, as you would expect, we have a vulnerability disclosure policy. We routinely notify organizations about vulnerabilities in their software, and that's us proactively detecting it. And so both are necessary and both are occurring at all times.
Yeah. So I guess, Lee, does that put organizations in a tricky place because they have to find that balance of what they react to first, or is it always obvious? Just the really nasty bad ones. But again, there could be a lot of those, I suppose.
It's perhaps not as obvious as you might think. There's a lot of organizations, even some with seasoned practitioners in this area, who are very much prioritizing based on CVSS scores, which don't necessarily tell the whole tale. They just tell you how severe that vulnerability could be, but they give you no idea of how likely it is to be exploited. I don't know if Raj will back this up, but most of these high-value CVSSs are exploited probably less than 5% of the time.
Correct.
Something like that.
So it's not a good guide at all.
No. It's far more important to look at business context. What are your key asset, your crown jewels? Which vulnerabilities target them? Because a lower severity threat targeting a high-value asset could be a more important one to remediate first.
Yeah. So I guess that first stage then is know what you've got out there as well. I don't know, Raj, if that's a problem as well that you find, just that organizations don't really know their estate as well.
Well, don't use CVSS.
All right.
Well, there are more important metrics that you need to do in order to be able to understand what you should patch and what you shouldn't patch. Like I think Lee touches upon, knowing and understanding your environment is critical. So, for example, we had, a ransomware group compromising, I think, the VPN Pulse. And clearly, if you have, a VPN server that's publicly accessible via the internet without any compensating controls, and that it's being exploited in the wild, and I think that's a key indicator which people don't really look at, then clearly that has to be prioritized. But equally, if you have something which, there might be something with a high CVSS score, but actually is not being actively exploited in the wild, then perhaps you can say, well, okay, we don't have to prioritize that straight away, but what we need is really strong intelligence to determine when it does become exploited in the wild. And I think that's the nuance that organizations need to migrate to, because you can't patch everything and you certainly can't prioritize everything. We become that little Dutch boy. You remember, like not the Dutch boy. It was Boy That Cried Wolf. Sorry, okay. I'm getting my stories mixed up. But you have to be the one to advise the business on what has to be done to what should be done. That, I think, is the kind of key path forward.
Actually, I think it probably was a little Dutch boy who stuck his finger in a hole spouting water. Is that where you go with that?
Yeah, the dam, right? Yeah, I think that, yeah.
But I think there's a lot of holes in a lot of dikes. I mean, that's the problem as well, isn't it? The sort of, and good luck spotting which one's flowing out hardest. But Lee, is that the case that sort of, so in the paper you talk about that life cycle, and it is, it's not, because it's not something a CISO or an InfoSec department should do by itself. There's a lot of other stuff that has to flow towards them to be able to make good decisions.
Yeah, it is. It's a complex process. And as you say, it should be continual as well. And there's challenges all along the way. So you've got asset discovery. You'd probably be surprised how many organizations don't have good visibility of their estate. You've got questions around the tooling as well in terms of asset discovery and vulnerability discovery. You've got communication and collaboration between security and other technical teams. And you've got that relaying the information back to the board as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects. I was chatting to someone last week who works for the MOD, and they was talking about asset discovery, and some of his assets are aircraft carriers. And you think, is that one thing? And he's like, no. There's lots and lots of things on that one, and it's a virtual asset as well, and it's part of a battle group and all kinds of things. So that asset discovery side and knowing what you've got out there is, again, not trivial for any large organisation.
Yeah, I mean, actually, one of the problems I found here is some organisations are actually good at asset discovery, but they've got multiple CMDBs and no one knows who's got what asset in their database, and therefore who should take responsibility and ownership for it.
Right. Yeah. Again, it's knowing yourself, or there's some discipline to that, I suppose, as well. But is that from both your days at McAfee? Did you find that a lot, that this did trip, the type of thing that trip people up, leaving aside some of those other problems like poor passwords and people clicking on phishing links when they shouldn't?
I mean, it's the most boring job there is, right? I mean, it's true, right? We would all rather be out threat hunting and looking for
not counting servers. Yeah.
But it's a darn sight more exciting. But like information governance, i.e., doing the hard yards, implementing cyber hygiene, knowing your risk, establishing. If you remember, the Cabinet Office's data handling requirements came up with this construct of senior information risk owners and business asset owners. Like, that's the fundamental of security. Knowing the assets you have, having the ability to be able to discover new assets, allocating the owners of given assets, and then setting out the risk appetite for. I mean, it's stuff we've been doing for. When did I start? I think it was like in the 90s. You remember, like, and when we started to do the CISSP, remember those big books and the orange books and things like that. This is the foundation of our industry. So it's more complicated because there are a darn sight more assets in organizations today than there ever were. And there are these ethereal assets, which kind of like these virtual machines that come and go and disappear. But like, this is the foundation of protecting your organization. So
yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I did some work on governance last year and was surprised how many organizations were only just really getting their governance sorted in terms of understanding what they had out there. Some of that was driven by the digital transformations they were going through. So suddenly a lot of their IT stuff was connected to their OT stuff, and their factories were suddenly part of that service chain as well. So yeah, it's got more complicated, but yeah, it was surprising to the point of shocking that how many people were only really just getting that going. Was that what you found as well, Lee, that people had bits of that life cycle but just really hadn't linked it up, and certainly hadn't? There were relatively few that were getting it right.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the report, there's quite a big section in there about that sort of communication side of things and people talking to each other and understanding where they are. That's still lacking.
Yeah, I'm sure that sort of conversations of InfoSec with other parts of the business is always difficult. But on the threat intelligence side, I just wonder because I remember as a journalist writing about various markets where vulnerabilities were bought and sold, and governments were quite good customers for those. Does that still happen, or is this much more about the technical discovery of these things, or once they're discovered, do they go on the open market somewhere?
It's a burgeoning market, and I'm really glad we're touching on this construct of threat intelligence, because I think it's easy to turn around and kind of have this commodity like, oh, we have threat intelligence, we have a PDF report sent in every week. Well, listen, that's just added noise. What has to happen is, I talk about this construct of actionable intelligence. So in other words, this is my estate. These are the systems that I have. This is the vulnerabilities that are being actively exploited that apply to my environment. And where applicable, the provision of threat hunting rules in order for me to be able to hunt and verify whether it exists. I mean, when I was a CISO, the question that I got scared of the most was, should I worry about this? Oh, I have no idea. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so, like with Move IT, so we have this open source technology called Velociraptor, and with Velociraptor you can do threat hunting. So it's all open source.
Mhm.
And then the teams actually develop threat hunting rules. And so that's the critical thing is as a security practitioner, you've got to ask yourself a question and say, is this something that I need to worry about? And being able to answer that question in almost real time has to be the intent.
Yeah.
And then you can then work on the remediation strategy. But that has to be the objective.
Yeah, I imagine CISOs are among the most professionally paranoid. But is it possible to get to that point of, and you're being able to sit back in your chair and relax and sleep at night as well? It's something CISOs say they never do, is because they're always worried about things. I don't know, Lee, did you meet a lot of harried and paranoid, twitchy CISOs when you're doing your research?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think any of them sleep too well.
But can they get to that point? I don't know if there was some good practice out there, because I know there's been examples of ISF members turning to automation to do some of this. I don't know if that's another royal road to more trouble, but whether they get to that actionable point where they can make a difference, being relatively as sure as they can, or as reassured as they can that they are taking good steps.
Well, actually, if we take one step back and revisit threat intelligence, most of the organizations I spoke to had some sort of threat intel capability.
Okay.
I suspect Raj is going to agree with me on this, but the consensus was, if you're going to do it internally, go big, and if you can't do that, go with a vendor. Because you can't just have one person spending a couple of hours a week on this area, because you're just generating noise, as Raj mentioned. In terms of automation, you have to be a little bit careful. You can probably automate asset discovery and vulnerability discovery. To some degree, you can automate patch management as well. You've got to be careful to test patches first.
Okay. Yeah, because it's easy to break stuff.
But do you, though? I mean, we've had this debate for a while, right? You talk about the mean time to exploitation, or the known time to exploitation. Critical vulnerabilities now are being exploited. Well, I think last year when we analyzed them, there were 20 days between discovery and exploitation. I think it's down to I think it was 12 days last year, and I think it's down to 5 days now. So your ability to be able to analyze and review patches has reduced, and that window is shrinking. But then equally, you've got the added argument of things like SolarWinds. And so you say, well, maybe we do want to start to really analyze whether we deploy a patch. And so there isn't an answer here, but I think maybe this is where your business context comes in, and you kind of go, hey, look, if it's our ERP servers and it's end of quarter, don't patch it. just leave that alone.
Yeah.
But heck, if it's the HR departments, with Windows laptops, and it's then absolutely automate it. And so I think there has to be this nuanced approach to things, but kind of having this default approach where we say, well, we're just going to spend a week analyzing the patches. I mean, let's be honest, within a week, it's already being actively exploited. So it may be too.
Yeah, but does that mean it's really bad out there? I mean, we're slightly insulated from it at the ISF, and we talk to members, and some of whom have horror stories to tell us. But if the bad guys are getting better at this, is there a looming issue here? I don't know, Lee, if you saw this, or Raj, you've seen this in your conversations with customers, or people who've been hit by breaches and things. Is it really bad?
I think I'm probably not qualified to comment on this, because everybody I spoke to just said it's really bad. We need more. We need more budget.
All right. Okay. Yeah. And they get those difficult questions from senior managers saying, "Are we secure?" Yeah, of course we are. Or I don't know. I mean, that's pointless questions like that.
No.
Right.
They're a bit more experienced than that. When they're asked if they're secure, the answer is no.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't know, Raj. Is it bad out there? Is it?
I mean, look, this shouldn't surprise anybody. Like, criminals that have made tens of millions of dollars are able to hire better people, are able to get skilled better, and are able to improve their attacks. I mean, that's the world that we live in. It's not. It shouldn't come as a surprise. But equally, our ability to be able to detect these threats has improved, and so, like I said, I've used Move IT kind of relentlessly, but that's a really good example of, the advisory from Progress came out literally days after we started to see exploitation in the wild, and so our ability to be able to spot this has improved, and so there is this constant game of kind of cat and mouse where they constantly have to improve and they have to constantly reduce the known time to exploitation, because our ability to be able to exploit exploitation has got so much better than ever before.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that's where the threat hunting, threat intelligence, and those other aspects of this come in as well. Just knowing what's out there and what you need to react to quickly as well, which I guess a lot of organisations struggle with. But to follow on that sort of hopeful note, it's obviously a lot of talk about AI, machine learning, and things like that, and I guess that's part of the automation as well. But is that going to help, Raj? I don't know if you guys are committing to that, or if Lee, there was particular tools or programs or projects you saw in member organisations that
I'd probably prefer to hear from Raj on that one, as he's the expert in this area. But I imagine that AI and automation can be used to sort of speed up detection, but obviously the human analysis side is still key.
Yeah, it needs to be a lot of testing, I imagine.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the challenge. When we were dealing with 1 a quarter or 3 a quarter or 5 a quarter, we absolutely can hire the best, reversers and analysts and so forth. When we had 8 in a 3-week window, I mean, it was 20-hour days pretty much for everybody flat out. And yeah, okay, that's, if it's peaks and troughs, that's sustainable to an extent. But we have to start looking at ways to be able to triage and analyze quicker and faster if the trend continues that these critical vulnerabilities are coming out at a rate and a pace that we're seeing. Yeah. With regards to machine learning and AI, I mean, gosh, look, I don't want to add to the hype machine, but it absolutely is a method for security efficacy. It has to be. Yeah. There are, yes, we have signatures and heuristics, but we absolutely have to be able to use machine learning to be able to identify those threats that don't behave in certain ways or aren't known knowns, right? So if, good criminals aren't using known bad C2s. It is a silver bullet, but not every threat's a werewolf. So, in other words, what I mean by that is that it absolutely can be used effectively, but you have to train the model. And as you train the model, naturally the threat actors are going to alter and change the way, because your detection is improved. And they're trying to bypass security technologies. And so it's a constant evolution from both sides.
Yeah, and it certainly has to be said that some of those machine learning systems take a while to adapt when they're good at taking in data, but significant events can disrupt them and give you strange outcomes, but also, they can take a while to pick up on some of those changes. So, it's interesting. But again, just to speculate wildly a bit about the future, Raj, it sounds like it's going to get worse, but is there hopeful signs? You said we're getting better at detecting these things. Are we getting better at, or organizations getting better at dealing with them? Because I guess that's the final stage of this. What are you going to do about it once you found it? That remediation and fixing them and protecting.
Well, I don't want to be pessimistic. I mean, I suppose coming from this industry, you're expected to be somewhat pessimistic. But we've never been better in this industry at protecting and detecting cyber attacks. I mean, we haven't. We've done so well as an industry that we're forcing the threat actors to innovate. I mean, you remember ransomware used to be an email and it was $200, and now we're talking about lateral movement and escalating privileges and data exfil. I mean, we're forcing them to improve, and likewise as they innovate, we are finding ways to be able to preempt that. So I would say that, and honestly, I love the ISF, and I think the work and the research you're doing kind of shows that, which is there is a wealth of information, content, and analysts and technology that's there to assist and support. It's just finding a way to kind of determine what's right for you, because there is a lot of guff out there. Is that a word? I don't even know.
Yes, thanks. Has many meanings. But Lee, would you agree with that? I don't know if the responses you got, the members you talked to, were they hopeful, or were they? I guess you tried to provide some guidance and help for them. But were they pessimistic or thinking, yeah, we can get ahead of this and we can get our arms around it?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the 20 minutes that went before this, you might think it's all doom and gloom, but it isn't. There are some really good success stories out there. As I touched upon earlier, the people using threat intelligence seem to be doing really well at minimizing their attack surface. I also think there's a lot to be said for just getting the basics right, from asset discovery through to vulnerability discovery. And also one for security people, because as a whole, we're not very good at this. We're quite sort of technical and narrow-minded. You need to think broader and look at the business as a whole. What is a business risk posed by these vulnerabilities versus what is just a security risk?
Yeah, I think that's a good closing thought is, I think, to paraphrase you, Raj, do the boring stuff and your life will be less exciting, but maybe that's a good thing because you won't be up all night and you can actually sleep. So, I want to say a huge thanks to Raj. Great to catch up. Thanks to Lee for giving us a quick roundup of the research. And you can now find ISF podcasts on all major podcast platforms. Look for our page on Audio Boom where you can subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. The podcasts are also available at securityforum.org where you can also learn more about ISF research, tools and guidance.